think I've always been a kind of player to challenge the norm.
Trill is a great addition to the team. His consistency is amazing. He always puts in as much effort as possible.
He was competing in PvP, and then because he couldn't, they didn't qualify, I think, and then he joined. They joined the 40K there.
You know, you think that you've seen the limits of what he's capable of, and then now all of a sudden he's here for BlizzCon, for MDI.
He's been blessed to be able to play with the best guild in the world and on NA side, and also to play with some of the best PvPers as well at the same time. And I mean, that does take dedication, and it takes a lot of hard work, and he shows that.
It's gonna be nice to, like, for their team to actually get some fresh blood into the team.
If you lose a guy like Lazelle, as a team, you're going to be kind of going like, oh, God, who do we replace him with, you know, last minute? And if you can find a replacement like Trill, I think you can go into the tournament being very confident.
One does not simply walk into Trillville. This man can do it all, Mr. Warcraft. And he's played with just about everyone. I think that that's one of the things that's so incredible when we actually get to see players talk about it. He's played in the top rating environments, he's played in the top dungeon environments, and he's played in the top PvP environments, literally holding up that trophy for Method on this stage last year. A pretty darn good pickup, and it's one of those questions, is Method the only thing that can beat Method here? So Trill, definitely someone that we're not going to take lightly. We're looking at the key right now that we will be going through, but Method is looking fantastic, Jack.
They have been, and that just goes to show what they can do with even more time at their own disposal.
And time is not something that we're going to have on this desk, because we're getting right into the action here, folks. A second map that could decide it. A strong start already for Method EU. They're looking to close it out here, but we're going to have to see what Games Revolted has to say about that.
I mean, if any kind of X factor is going to come to play, it needs to come in at this point. Love seeing the double DKs on both sides. I'm really a big fan of the Mistweaver on this one as well. I'm surprised he's not going with it.
I mean, it's interesting to see a difference in the terms of healers. Usually when we see somebody not swap to the new sort of comp healer, which is that, like you mentioned, the Mistweaver Monk here, it's usually a matter of either having something special planned with the Druid, or maybe it's just a comfort pick. So I'm interested to see if playing the Druid enables anything here for them.
Be interested as well as we're seeing both Unholy DKs, popping off and absolutely obliterating these packs. One thing we're going to see a lot of in Shrine are those snap spots as well.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a reason for that, of course. Shrine is notorious for being one of the most difficult dungeons for dealing with the trash, especially this first section of the dungeon before the first boss. There's so many casts that you have to deal with. That's why we see them running the double Unholy DK, because as you pull more, you do more and more exponential damage to the point where you kind of just kill the trash before it does anything.
That's right, we've seen a number of times, and we're going to consistently see it tonight of how well these guys are going to be able to start grabbing all the trash that they can, bringing it into the boss as Method EU is just about to engage with Aquasur.
And you're going to see the Unholy DKs with Bloodlust, with the Army of the Dead. They're going to be popping off on single target. Of course, they're pulling all of these extra mobbins just to fuel that Unholy DK AoE engine. They'll be building up their Festermite stacks, giving them a massive amount of strength, and you're going to see the power of the Unholy DK. Look at Fragments going up, already on 400 DPS.
Yeah, you love to see it, and hopefully they're going to be able to bring in that other round of blobs. But Mears does go down. It looks like he's even out of range of Fragments. I'm not sure if he's actually off the cliff or not.
That's completely uncanny for them. I mean,
I'm not seeing a battle res going up.
There's no battle res coming out, so I mean, there's a question that you have to ask here. It's a tyrannical boss. Aquasur's at 80%. Do you want to four-man the rest of the boss, or do you want to reset and start again? And it looks like they're going to reset the boss. So they're going to have to deal with the rest of the trash. But Fragments also goes down. This is another problem. It's a raging dungeon with everything so low and not having all of your DPS available. You can't deal with this trash with the Unholy DKs.
They just have a full round of Shadow Melds go out just to be able to try to drop threat from those bosses.
And it looks like it.
Yeah, it looks like it at that point. But you are seeing now just about to go down. Everybody is dying. Method EU having their wipe, and this is the opening that Games Revolted needs to really get back in the series.
And they went for a similar pull. It looks like they're still dealing with a lot of the trash from that pull, but it looks like they were able to deal with the Unholy DKs. You can look at the damage they're doing, and you might look at Trill's damage and say, wow, he's doing nothing compared to the Unholy DKs. But this is usually a team play. Usually, as an Outlaw Rogue, you're not going to want to hit that Blade Flurry to do that AoE damage. You'll opt not to, just so you can let the Unholy DKs take advantage of it. He won't worry about cleaving until there's only 1 or 2 mobs left. So just a huge team play there from Trill. These guys are looking fantastic.
It's a very big team play, and you are seeing Trill in a great position to still be able to cleave onto Windspeaker, hopefully onto both Aqualings as well. He does have quite a large melee range compared to those DKs, and you're seeing they're cleaving down 2 at a time instead of having any one singular focus, so they got to really watch out for any of the surging rushes coming out from these Aqualings.
Yeah, and of course you can see most of them go off and stand on top of the stairs because the surging rushes will never actually go past the circle of the room. So just big heads-up play. I mean, Trill just stayed in the center of the room. I don't really know. Maybe he's just more confident than the rest of the players. But that was, you know, that's the hardest part of the fight, when all three of the Aqualings are surging rushing at the same time. And usually what we'll see from a lot of teams is them focusing down the Aqualings one at a time. But Games Revolted opted to cleave down too. That shows that they are very practiced in this dungeon. And like we said yesterday, a zero-death run, Method EU has to catch up fast.
They do, and that's going to be increasingly difficult because on the other side, Games Revolted also has that wind speaker held as you're seeing that extra haste buff that everyone's standing in to take advantage of it, and they're barely dealing any damage whatsoever to it. They're taking advantage of that bonus haste field, and we're also on the raging affix, so we want to make sure that that mob is only enraging when we have, actually they don't even have a Soothe Dispel at that point. I was about to say, they don't even have the Soothe Dispel at the moment, so when wind speaker held drops low, he is going to be dealing double damage, and that is going to have to be something they focus down immediately.
And that's the benefit of having the Resto Druid. They're the only healer that has that Soothe available that will remove the Raging effect. Of course, we haven't talked about what Raging is. It's a double damage modifier whenever they get below a certain point of health, and they keep that until they die, so it's really dangerous to deal with. Of course, with the double Unholy DK comp, usually you're in that Raging scenario for such a small amount of time that you really don't need to deal with it. You just kill the mob so fast.
That you do, and we're also seeing interesting from looking at the talent perspective. We're able to look at everyone's cooldowns, defensives, and offensive cooldowns right underneath their character frames, and we're seeing Dampen Harm coming out on the side of Igloo instead of Diffuse Magic. I love to be able to see this here because not only is Diffuse Magic massive for magic damage, which is great for a lot of this dungeon, but it also auto-dispels you, which is something that he just cannot have for the last boss with that big damage buff.
Something to mention here, Igloo did proc his staff here. He won't that have available. He won't be able he won't be able to build up those stacks for the final boss of the dungeon where he'll be able to pretty much one-shot all of those eels they pull. He will be able to build up maybe like 4 or 5 minutes of stacks, but that's not 100% ideal for them not having that available. They'll just have to let the Unholy DKs deal with it, unfortunately.
That's true, and it's tough to be able to make sure that you have the staff stacks available as a Mistweaver Monk. Running with the new style with Way of the Crane, the new Conflict and Strife Essence makes it so you can do some incredible damage. You're going to see a big chunk of mana go and disappear from Igloo as he pops Way of the Crane, starts his spinning to win. He's running double crit damage modifiers from his Azurite traits with Lightborn Infusion and Swirling Sands, so he is putting up some great numbers, especially in terms of just stabilizing the group. We've seen, you know, this is some decent HPS, but everybody was able to get into the defensive field. We've seen previously where some very aggressive pulls are able to be enabled not only from double Unholy DK, but also from a Mistweaver Monk with Way of the Crane.
And that was fantastic use, like you mentioned, of the Ring of Peace to make sure everything got knocked back so that they could just stand inside that safety zone on the ground there, taking 75% reduced damage, just making sure that they're safe. Now, of course, once Runecarver Soren does get below 30% HP, he gets Raging, and that Carved Flesh absolutely chunks you, even with the damage reduction. So you really need to make sure that you aren't in that phase for a long time, and they pulled that pull off perfectly. We've seen so many teams go down to that throughout the past year.
And a lot of times it's also about making sure that you're watching as this goes together, as they're pulling these mobs together, and not eating up too much time without focusing some of the right mobs. We're seeing Soren, he has a lot of HP at his disposal, and they did a very good job at making sure they took it all down. We've also seen this skip in particular across the bridge, going to the second boss room, been failed a number of times. They did a great job getting out of the way of any of those Tempests, any of the other tornadoes going around. And again, another huge pull on the side of Games Revolted, hoping to extend their lead.
And once again, you can see the AoE stuns coming out whenever they have those area of denials on the ground. We'll probably see the Ring of Peace after this leg sweep. Their AoE CC, this almost reminds me of Legion with how much AoE CC they're using and perfectly using leg sweeps. I mean, the frontal stuns from the Warrior, the Ring of Peace, they're perfect. They don't even have to worry about standing in those stuns. The trash is gone. That was perfect.
You love to see it. And even just, you know, the 60k DPS, 60k HPS out of the Mistweaver onto that one. It feels amazing. I love this Shroud coming up right now. They're skipping a couple of the initiates right now. They want to make sure they're getting some good cleave damage right when they get the haste buff. It should drop in just a moment right now, and then they're going to be able to absolutely pump that single target damage into Galecaller Fae.
Yeah, and I mean, that's really... Unfortunately, they're not going to be able to do too much because the trash kind of there just instantly dies.
Yeah.
But what I'm interested to see here is if they're going to opt to use a strategy we saw come out in the eastern region of the Final Cups last season, where they end up standing on the ledge on the right side of the room. It looks like they're opting to not do that. They're just going to be standing in the middle of the room, dodging tornadoes and cleaving the bosses down. Now, of course, the major strategy that we see for most teams is to make sure you're focusing down Gale Caller Faye. Oh, and here we go. They're in this position now. In the significance of this position is you'll be able to dodge all of the tornadoes. You don't have to move too much for them. The only thing you have to make sure you watch out for is that frontal stun from Brother Ironhole.
That's right, and getting this positioning perfect has been taking a lot of time for some tanks, and being able to see it on full display, making sure you're able to let all the melee sit up on that ledge, avoid any of the tornadoes while the tank is avoiding them themselves, and making sure they very quickly get Gale Caller Faye out of that field, making sure none of the Unholy DK or any of the other dots dropping off. So it's very important to have quick movement on the tank. Lots of pressure on them.
And like I was mentioning before they started to move into position, usually what we see from a lot of the safer strategy teams is they'll focus down Gale Caller Faye because they don't want to have to deal with the slicing blast interrupts for too long, but they're opting to go for the more efficient, faster boss kill strategy where they cleave them down for the most part equally. You can see they're at roughly at 50% right now. So this is going to be better in the long run. It's probably about 30 seconds faster than focusing one boss down. So you'd like to see the efficiency here.
Yeah, and you need to have every little benefit. I mean, at the moment, Method EU is behind, but at this point, they've already pulled Gale Caller Faye and Brother Ironhole onto this one. They're just really getting started while Games Revolted is halfway through, but trash percentage is very close by. You got to keep in mind those 8 deaths, but we can't count Method EU out just yet.
I mean, those 8 deaths are a massive amount of time. 40 seconds is nothing to laugh at. It's probably, it's a pretty significant amount of time. Games Revolted would have to pretty much have a huge problem, or Method EU, like they mentioned, would have to have some ridiculous strategy which makes up all of that lost time. And I mean, at this point, with the way that Games Revolted played yesterday, I'd be very surprised to see them go down in the dungeon.
It's true, and but one of the most interesting things, though, is Method EU was talking about how strong their times in this dungeon can be. We've seen constant back and forth from teams as to whether or not they're going to be able to quickly kill the final boss onto this one, how quickly they'll be able to do it, how well they'll be able to take advantage of the Eel's extra cleave damage so far. I'm interested in seeing how many phases we're going to have to get on 18 Tyrannical.
Yeah, now, of course, the one advantage that they still have is Zaylee still has a staff available. So he's going to be able to completely one-shot all of those if he's able to proc it perfectly. And usually, for a healer, it's not really that difficult to do. So, I mean, that is an advantage, but how much of an advantage is that really? The Unholy DKs can just take care of it.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say is, yeah, it's nice to be able to go and have a massive one-shot proc. I love being able to do it on live servers, but it also just fuels massive single-target damage, so you have to be able to see which is going to be more beneficial to your group.
Yep, and of course we do have the second boss going down for Games Revolted here, while Method EU, we mentioned it earlier, they're opting to go for the safer strategy here. They're killing off Gale Caller Faye way ahead of Brother Ironhole. It's almost below 20%, where they still have Ironhole at 60%. Now, in order to combat the inefficiency of dealing with one of the bosses first, usually what we'll see with this strategy is them ending up pulling 1 or 2 trash mobs on top of the remaining health of Brother Ironhole, just to make sure that they're cleaving something down. Whenever we talk about efficiency in the MDI and making sure you're being the most efficient possible, you almost never want to be single targeting something down, because cleave is always way more damage.
Most definitely. Better to hit 2 things instead of 1. We've seen a big Shadow Meld on the side of Games Revolted, running past all of those other mobs, taking advantage of that Night Elf ratio. We're seeing Trill pop tricks and he took 1 hit for his efforts, but he's redirecting all the aggro, redirecting all of those mobs, and once one of the patrols runs through other unactivated patrols, it social aggroes them and brings everybody in all together to join the party. Here we go.
And this is awesome. So one of the biggest problems with doing a triple pack on the bridge is that the 2 patrols patrol in different sections. And the biggest problem is making sure they all stack up at the exact same time, and having Trill go with that stealth, make sure he trickses the pack, everything will slowly creep together. That was just perfect control. And the way they've been playing this dungeon, the AOECC once again is completely perfect. And once again, with the double Unholy DK, everything is dead before they have to deal with too many of the mechanics.
Who needs a Soothe Dispel? They just didn't even have to worry about it when you have double DK. They obliterate it all.
That was fantastic, and I don't think we've seen that kind of strategy. That's the kind of thing that Trill can bring to your team. That's some of the huge brain strategies that we can see from him.
That's right, and they're getting themselves ready to go to Lord Storm Songs. They're taking care of some of those Abyss Defilers. Matari's running up to start that RP, making sure the events get rolling. They might have to go after the other pack. It's really dangerous having to deal with these enraging dwellers if they're all getting cleaved down equally.
Yeah, and we also saw them.
Here they go for the next one.
In order to combat that, we saw them going for half sides at the same time.
That's right, and very cool to see how they're going to be dealing with the Emissary of the Tides at the same time. Because as we've talked about before, yes, it prevents it from having any of those casts being interrupted, but if you start adjusting the Z-axis, if you start adjusting the height level of this Tides Emissary, you put it onto one of the pews, then you're able to start dropping some stuns and interrupts into those dwellers and make your life a lot easier.
And of course, we do have them now engaging the third boss, Lord Stormsong, and this is kind of a big chunk of a health boss. There's not a whole lot that goes on here. They really just need to make sure they get interrupts, but the biggest section of this fight is making sure you're dealing with those Void Orbs properly. Whenever a player in your group gets mind controlled, you have to make sure that they can soak all of these Void Orbs. Of course, if you run into one of those without that mind control, you get stunned for 8 seconds and you probably get one shot on this difficulty on Tyrannical, so you're going to see them slowly kiting the boss around the room, making sure they're dealing with those orbs perfectly.
Yeah, this boss also kind of reminds me of Captain Lockwood, what we just saw in Morales. You're not quite able to get lots of high efficiency into it. It's just this boss that stands alone. You're not able to grab any of those tentacles into the pack as well. We saw a little bit of trash being pulled into Lockwood, but because you have the spotter, it pretty much doesn't matter onto that one. You just kind of have to be able to drag this fight out and be able to just follow the mechanics as well as you can. We also have to look at how well they're going to be using any of their shadow melds or any of their AMS immunities to make sure they're avoiding getting mind controlled so they don't have to waste any time.
We saw on the side of Method EU, they have now also pulled off the triple bridge pack just as perfectly as Games Revolted did, using that Typhoon into Ursul's to make sure they have an extra form of CC there that, you know, counteracts the Ring of Peace from the Monk. And I mean, honestly, they're not tilting at all. They're playing perfectly for the rest of the dungeon. And when I think about Method EU, we've said it so many times, their biggest competition, in my opinion, is themselves. If they play perfectly, I think that they have the best strats in general. So it's good to see them able to come back in this dungeon and give themselves an opportunity should Games Revolted have some mistakes at the end of the dungeon here.
That's right, and they'll have to be able to capitalize on any of those mistakes if we see them out of Games Revolted. But let's talk about Sydney Land, though. You know, we saw they didn't really have as optimized of a group as they wanted, making sure they were getting the entire team available to them. This time, they counteracted that. They got the right people in the right spot and made sure they got as much practice as they needed to. And we're seeing the real Games Revolted. We're seeing the real 40K that we've been able to enjoy from our regular season.
I mean, Games Revolted, when they were 40K in the second season, we questioned them a lot whether or not they were the caliber of team that could make it to BlizzCon, because they were sitting in that 4th place slot for so long. And honestly, the way they were playing throughout that season, it made us question them a bit. But in the Final Cup,
they almost lost it.
They did almost lose their spot. But in the Final Cup, they showed us by winning the entire cup that they were ready. Now, unfortunately, like we mentioned before, they have Trill instead of Lazzle here. But this team, they don't look like a team that has a sub. They're playing so well.
Yeah, we even were able to talk about that for some of the offline games yesterday. You know, it doesn't look like this is a team that should be in the lower bracket for it, unless it's BlizzCon at this point, because we've been so stacked to the gills with the best teams possible. So, Games Revolted 86% on trash, and as they approach our final boss in this one, and looking to be able to try to tie up the series if they can.
And of course, one thing that I want to talk about, because it never happened through the cups, but I'm going to bring it up whenever we have the double on Holy DK in the Shrine of the Storm. On Tyrannical, this boss is so much HP, but with enough burst damage, you can just barely have a chance to one-phase this boss. We never saw it in the final season, and like we mentioned Red Captain Lockwood earlier, of course, this is a similar mechanic to that, where the boss goes into an entire new intermission phase. If you're able to one-phase this boss, you save over a minute of time. So I'm interested to see if either of these teams are going to be able to pull that off.
Yeah, it's always been the kind of challenge. They're getting themselves ready. They're grabbing the eels. Everyone's getting themselves together. I even see a couple channel trinkets as we get ready to be able to pull our final boss. Games Revolted wants to be able to seal the deal into this one. Even getting the Ring of Peace up so they can start organizing and rounding up these mobs together as Volzit's about to be pulled.
They're letting the DKs stack up their Festermite before they pull the boss so that they have the strength buff for the entire boss instead of just when they pull it. I think these guys are going to go for it. Now, keep an eye on the boss's percentage.
Oh, it's gone! Curie destroyed it! It's not there anymore!
The lowest we saw this boss get in cup play was like 72%.
It's already there! It's already there! It's gone.
Guys have a shot of, they're going to go for it. I'm so excited for this. They're just going right into the trash here. This is fantastic.
Well, it's great because they start building up some stacks that they're going to be able to funnel into the other phase. So once they drop down into this bit of intermission phase, it resets those mobs that they already pulled upstairs. So the Forgotten and Sunken Denizens just reset. And then once they break out, they're going to be able to engage them again, even with the boss, and to absolutely obliterate them as well, and pump up that single target damage on Volzit.
And this is another strategy that we haven't seen yet. They're opting to just cleave down this trash with the boss instead of deal with it separately. We almost always see teams try to deal with the 3 denizens by their own because their casts are so difficult to deal with. You know, if they get one of them off, they heal to full HP, they do a lot of damage to the group. They one-shot your healer because he has that damage buff on him. And I mean, this is such a huge confidence play. They're just going to cleave them down with the boss.
They know they're able to do this. They know they're confident. They got one last denizen to take down in the netherworld before they're able to come back to reality, grab more eels, bring it into the big pack. Igloo's got to be very careful on this one, because keep in mind, he has 10% of his usual HP. If he gets hit by one of those eels, he's going down.
They're doing it again. They're going to be building up those stacks on the DK, building up those Festerman strain stacks, and they're going to be pulling into the boss. Army of the Deads are coming out.
I love the patience. Bloodlust going as well. They're going to be able to absolutely destroy these Forgotten Denizens. They're making sure they put up a skull on top, make sure they... Oh, the cast does go off, but Igloo lives. He does use Cocoon, dampen, but he goes down. He goes down. He did get killed. They do have a res available, but he does end up losing his 9 stack damage buff, so it has to get refreshed. The boss has to recast it onto that one. They really got to be able to top off Rentari here.
I'm interested to see how low this boss gets. I think with the healer death, there's going to be no chance of them phasing the boss, but they have to make sure that they deal with that Forgotten Citizen. It's casting that Consume Essence in the back, and if that goes off, Igloo might go down again.
He will go down again if they don't get that kick. Nobody's in range to be able to do it. The cast goes off. Igloo's at 25, and Disco's down under this one. They have another battle res available. They have just one left, but they're going down into that phase, and they cannot afford any more mistakes.
Now, I believe Igloo did dispel himself right before that cast went off because he knew it was going to go off, but Disco didn't have anything available. The Icebound Fortitude, the AMS, both of them were on cooldown, so he just had to go down. But they're in this intermission phase right now. They have to complete this intermission phase before they can come back up and deal with the rest of the boss.
The other problem is they didn't kill 2 of the denizens in reality onto that one, so they're still going to be missing a little bit of trash. And that field is going to be blocked by that void zone. So if they come back to reality, they have to wait or even just kill the boss outright before they can pull those denizens and finish up their trash. Not as clean as we wanted to see. Method EU, we can't be forgetting about them. They're at 70% as they're going to engage with the boss for the second time.
Their boss is 7% higher. If they're able to one-phase this boss, they could have a chance of still taking this map, so we'll have to keep an eye on how much damage we're doing to the boss,
because this is
definitely possible. They're pulling all of the remaining trash into the boss. They're going to be cleaving it down with the DKs. Zalia did end up rocking his staff there, but we have Igloo down again for Games Revolted, and they don't have a res available.
They just got to kill this boss onto this one. They're trying to be able to get that Forgotten Denizen back in, but 2 casts have gone off because, again, it's in that void puddle. Like I mentioned, they need to be able to get a ranged kick onto it. The DKs have a little bit wider range than the other ones do.
Look at that
watch the manifestations. 5% onto Volzit. We just looked away. It was at 70 onto this one. They are destroying this boss. Man. They bring it down, but there's still a big death differential on this one.
So Games Revolted still has 25 seconds on the board in that death differential to take care of the rest of the trash. If they're able to kill these 2 trash mobs within that timer, they still take this dungeon, but they have so much HP left to deal with. I don't think it's going to happen.
It's going to be so tough for them, and Method EU is just so well prepared to be able to capitalize on any of the mistakes that Games Revolted had. There's 3 deaths throughout the boss fight. It was just a nightmare, and Method EU 2-0s Games Revolted.
Well, there's not much to say to that, but welcome to BlizzCon, ladies and gentlemen. What a series that ends up being from start to finish. We have so much to talk about how we actually see that victory come in, Tenos.
Man, it was just Games Revolted throwing it at the very end. They were so far ahead going into Volzith's room. They implemented like it was a really well done strategy for how to deal with Volzith, with the eels, with the Festermite stacks, really min-maxing that Death Knight damage. But it was just a little bit risky. Igloo goes down, he loses his 9-stack buff, and then from then they're not able to phase the boss. They have some resets on the trash, and they just, man, that was rough.
I think this is one of those scenarios that we go back to, though. Do you think they have to take a risk like that if they're hoping to win this?
Okay, so they absolutely have to take a risk like that because prior to this, they don't know how Method EU is going to be doing the dungeon. They also have no idea where they stand prior to that. They don't know that there's like an 8 death differential. They actually played this composition because they are taking that risk. With that Mistweaver Monk, it allows for you to be able to phase Volzith a little bit quicker, and overall, it looked like they were doing really well. They got off to a super early lead just based off some mistakes that Method EU had on AccuSeer, but man, just being able to close out, that was just unfortunate.
It really does all come back to that start, though, right? From Method EU. Ultimately, we're going to see a little bit of a hiccup on AccuSeer, and they have to go back. They actually have to go for the reset jack.
That's just got to be such a gut-wrenching feeling as well. Shrine of the Storm is not forgiving with its checkpoints onto that one. Wiping onto the first boss, having to reset it, grab everybody back together, wait for their shadow melds as well to be able to get back on track. It just goes to show that they got ice in their veins for these kind of competitive formats. They're on stage, they're in the lower bracket, facing elimination, and then they bring it back after a catastrophic early mistake.
I think that's the most telling thing here is ironic. You have a team that has a huge hiccup on the first boss, and then they go on confidently to take this entire series. When we look at Method EU, I don't think that there's a question that they are a scary team to be looking at.
I think that's going to be a huge confidence booster for Method EU. We've talked about it so many times in this early part of the tournament already. Their biggest opponent is themselves, and to be able to have that huge wipe like they had, take it back into consideration, go through the dungeon, no deaths, perfect run after that, even one phasing the boss, something we haven't seen all year after they changed it to Tyrannical. I mean, they've got to be feeling great right now.
All right, well, let's find out if they are. We're going to jump down to the main stage. I think we get to talk to Gingy.
Hey everyone, I am here with Gingy of Method EU. Now, you guys have been telling me that you've been practicing quite a lot this week, and now you've just won the first match of the day. How does that feel?
Well, it obviously feels good, but I'm not really happy with our performance. The first game was like average, and the second game we had a slight miss-up on the first boss, so we need to shape up if we want to win the whole tourney.
Now, you lost yesterday during the offline games to Method NA. How do you put that loss behind you to focus on today's games?
Well, of course it sucks to lose, but at the same time, we get to play more on the stage, so that's a bonus.
Now, you said that you're going to have to play it out through the rest of the lower bracket. Are you concerned at all about getting fatigued or tired?
No, I think it's... it can benefit us, just being on stage, being warm, and just waiting to see who the next opponent is, and just stay there and beat the rest.
All right, well, really excited for you guys, and congratulations once again. Back to you guys at the desk.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what you call a winner's mentality. Takes the series 2-0. Yeah, pretty disappointing performance to start. Fantastic stuff coming out of Method EU, and you can see you really do kind of have to be the most critical on yourself if you're going to be able to pull down the big W.
And these guys really are the most critical of themselves. They're constantly looking for ways to be able to improve, and we even saw in Australia, you know, they just hate to lose. They hate to be able to perform at a lower level than they're expecting. And we've seen it so many times where they've been pressing themselves and pushing the meta to the extent that they have to make sure they're the best team always.
I want to look at that a little bit more because I know off camera we were talking about it a little bit. We haven't had much of an opportunity to talk about it. But as we look at the bracket right now, I want to keep in mind that first LAN of the year and what we actually think of these squads based off of that. There was only that one LAN. So Jack, anything that you really want to put the microscope on for the folks at home?
I think a lot of the microscope is going to be on to the Method NA and Abracadabra. We're going to see them after our next lower quarters matchup. These guys have constantly been playing second, third place in cup play. Method NA took it from Method EU in Australia, a lot of times because of Method EU's own mistakes. They were just not there at 100% for the grand finals, even though they tore through the rest of the tournament.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that you brought up that is really important, we got to shift gears right now and actually think of that next matchup. As was mentioned by Jack, it's going to be Buff War versus Team D Tettles. What do we need to be thinking about before we jump into this?
I think overall we need to be looking at how Buff War can compete with the rest of the Western region. Overall, they were dominant in the Eastern Cup. I think they're about to dominate Team D here. Of course, they had a little bit of visa issues, so they're playing with the substitute as well. They just don't look as refined. They don't look as practiced. So I think Buff War is definitely going to take it 2-0, but we have to think about it with just a little bit of grain of salt. Just think about how they're going to perform moving forward.
I'm a completely non-toxic individual at all. Not hot. Oh, man.
Sorry.
I'm very...
Oh, I thought you were bringing the jokes since Lit was in here.
Guys, we're going to jump to a quick commercial break. We don't want you to go anywhere. We got plenty of action just around the corner, folks. This BlizzCon has already started off with a bang, and we are going to see Method EU be able to take it in a 2-0. The question is, are we going to see another 2-0? It's going to be Buff War versus Team D when we return. Let's see who's going to take it.